Welcome to another episode of Dad Up, everyone. Thank you guys very much for joining me. I'm excited to have this individual on because he and I have actually just recently connected, and I love his story, and he's going to share all that and all the stuff he's doing. But my good friend Tom Murphy has joined me on Dad Up. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey man, thanks so much. Great to meet you. And I think I can say Semper Fi. I think I have the right to say that. My daughter Claudia is in the Marine Corps.
Oh,
Just had a
cool.
just had a huge dad moment. I was kind of holding off to tell you this, but my daughter Claudia, I got three girls and one young man from 25 to Thomas just turned 19. But my daughter Claudia at 18, she was the one that was a bit of a challenge, but she came home at the age of 18 and said, I joined the Marine Corps today. I said, Claudia, what are you talking about? What do you mean you joined the Marine Corps? And she said, yeah, I joined the Marine Corps and I'm going to be in the infantry. I said, what? And Claudia just pulls the trigger on everything without thinking. That's just her personality. And so she goes to basic training, gets through with flying colors, gets assigned as a mortarman in the infantry, goes to school, did very well, and then then she ran into a bit of a snag. Just most of the young other male Marines in the infantry in the Marine Corps, it's not the place for a lot of young women.
Mhm.
I don't know if I'd want to, and I can understand. I don't know if I'd want to get shot, and be wounded and have a 120-pound young lady have to drag me, 3 or 4 miles. So I kind of understand some of the context, but Claudia fought through it, tooth and nail. And it was tough for her. And she got deployed once, and she's getting ready for her second deployment right now. But last week, man, I had some tears come to my eyes. Her captain actually got my info and sent me a voice recording of General Berger, who I believe is the commandant for the entire Marine Corps. And it's this about 10, 15-minute speech he was giving on women in the Marine Corps. And wouldn't you know, the last woman he brings up is Claudia,
Mm.
and just talks about, this young woman who, I don't need to give you this lecture. You don't, if you're in the Marine Corps, you got to do what everyone else does or you drop out, of marches and other things that they do.
Mhm.
So she got no grace from anyone and she fought through it. So she just graduated a couple of weeks ago from the Advanced Infantry School. She's the
Awesome.
first woman in American history that's ever graduated from that school on the West
That's
Coast.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome,
So,
man.
well,
Proud dad moment.
yeah. I thought of you when I knew I was going to be on the podcast. And I said, I'll hold on to that a little bit and tell you about Claudia.
Oh, that's cool, man. I'm happy for her. That's awesome, and I'm happy for you as well. That's very, very cool. Let's do this, and we're going to dive into that because I want to
Yeah.
know more about that story and kind of the relationship between you and your daughter, and especially her making that decision. Because I have my own story with me going in the Marines. But for my listeners who may not know who you are, tell me a little bit more about yourself, kind of how you grew up, and then how you got into the things you're doing, and then obviously about your family.
Yeah, man, I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. I'll try and keep this under 5 minutes or so. It's a long story, man. It's my journey began in Philadelphia. I was born and raised there till I was about in third grade or so. My parents ran a mission home, used to take people off the streets of Philadelphia. It wasn't a state-run home. It was just my parents opening up our home to people that, were hopeless, that had nowhere to go. And I could write an entire book on my different brothers and sisters growing up. And we would go to prison on the weekends and visit, you know, brothers and sisters that sat at the dinner table with us the week before. We had, I could go on and tell you about Bobby Cummings, Karen Archer, Don, and most of the stories don't have happy endings, my friend.
Hmm.
These were people that just had no place to go and they were truly hopeless. And at the age of, I've said this a couple times publicly. I just started talking about it a couple years ago, but I slept in a bathtub for a year. My parents gave my bedroom away to someone that needed it, and their only
Hmm.
biological son. I got pushed into the third floor bathroom, and
Wow.
my bed became the tub. but it's okay. When you're a kid, there's like nothing like grabbing your blankets and your pillows and jumping in the tub, you know? And so that was my life growing up. But I also was a struggling learner. In the second or third grade, they labeled me dyslexic, and my dad just took me out of school and said, "Oh, that just means that you can read backwards better than other people." He said, "The Jews do it, you'll be fine," which is probably not the best thing to tell a struggling learner. But he homeschooled me for a year, and then he literally opened up a real estate catalog, pointed to upstate New York. My mom and my father had, just born and raised and grew up in Philadelphia, and just moved us, opened it up, pointed to a page, and moved us to upstate New York. Bought a house for $34,000, and I got into school, put me back into public school, and of course they labeled me, put me in a combination class. It was like a 3-4 combination. Struggled through that year. They tested me. Of course, I got tested with some different abilities than other people, and my dad held me back a year, which was probably one of the best things he could have done. John Medina, the great molecular biologist, wrote a great book. Anyone listening, you should. I would hands down one of the greatest reads for teenage parents. It's called Attack of the Teenage Brain. He's one of the great molecular biologists of our times, and he talks about this dual systems model that we can look at a physical body and say, oh, he or she is ready for this or ready for that, but we don't look at the brain the same way. And my brain just was behind when it came to its maturation. And so my dad held me back a year, probably the best thing that ever happened to me. But I continued to struggle in school. I mean, I've never met my academic equal. I graduated with a 630 combined score on my SATs. You probably got that on one half of your SATs. I just had some challenges, but I found the sport of wrestling. And I should just take a step backwards because a lot of young people will say to me, hey, Tom, when did you start wrestling? And I say, well, as soon as I could stand up, my dad knocked me down. And I had this insatiable, innate, I don't even know what to call it, spirit to put my hands on things. And when I was a kid, every night, I'm not talking once a week, twice a week, every night, we'd clear out the living room. My dad would get on his knees, put on some snow mittens. I'd put on these kids' boxing gloves, and we'd go at it. And this persisted until I got to be, a young man. And we would break beds and put holes in walls. And I mean, if my mom were on this call right now, she would, she could tell you some horrific stories. And most of the time as a kid, it always ended in, I'd say rage on my part. I was the kid that had to, if I didn't win a game, I was going to turn the board over. And I just couldn't stop. And the funny thing was, neither could my dad. And my dad never let me win a single thing, whether it was a board game. But as I look back, man, it wasn't anything malicious. It was just this nature that he and I had, and it was very similar. But I got that all under control once I found the competitive sport of wrestling, and it just dominated my life. I thought I was going to wrestle for the rest of my life. And, once I graduated from high school, I really wanted to wrestle in college. A long story I tell young people about how I got into college. It's almost will make you believe in cosmic forces. But I ended up getting into college to wrestle, really fall in love with education. A man came into my life, a guy named Dr. Owen Ireland, ran for the New York State Senate, just a brilliant, brilliant man. And he was the guy that taught me that life was not a talent contest, it's a strategy game. And those that have the great strategies in life win. And he just got me to see that I had every strategy that I needed to be successful in academics, just use the same strategies that I had developed through wrestling. And I talk to young people about those strategies all the time. And I just started to apply them to academics. And I graduated with almost a perfect GPA in philosophy and psychology. But I wasn't ready to stop wrestling. I did very well. I was runner-up in the country my last year. And I found myself married at the age of 24, had a baby, was on my way to graduate school, literally got derailed by the railroad industry where I spent 17 years. But I wasn't ready to stop wrestling, as I just said. And I'll land this plane pretty quick here so you can jump in. I wasn't ready to stop wrestling. And I just happened to move to a part of the country that was an hour away from one of the greatest teams on planet Earth in the sport of mixed martial arts. And I just started to train with those guys. And I didn't have any thoughts of competing in sports, professionally. It was a lot smaller back then. But I found myself, in a couple amateur competitions and then a professional competition or so. And then I found myself on a crazy TV show called The Ultimate Fighter, season 2, which led to a little bit of time with the UFC. But I was working at the same time. I was developing a wonderful career, and bought a couple businesses, owned a restaurant for 12 years at the same time, owned a pretty big gym at the same time. And I was doing all these different things. But what happened after the show was a lot of people called me that I knew and said, "Hey, my kid saw you. Could you talk to my volleyball team, my basketball team?" And I just found myself talking to young people. This was about 14 years ago. Leadership, motivational, goal setting kind of stuff. And I said, yeah. And then probably a year or two into it, just doing maybe 20, 25 different little events every year for a couple of years. A buddy that I graduated college with and wrestled with called me in a panic, and he said, "Hey, can you do something on bullying?" And I'm like, maybe.
Right.
So I just took it from my perspective, and I went. Another school saw it and was like, "Whoa, that's incredible. Could you do that at our school?" And literally, man, 2 million kids later, from Houston to Hawaii to Montreal and back, my speaking partner and I have just crisscrossed this great nation. And we've been on a journey, man. It's been an incredible journey. I'll kind of land on this key point here. When I first started talking to young people, I would find myself after a lot of assemblies in an auditorium with the lights going down, one or two kids wander back in, sneak back in, and just telling me their stories. And, really what it took me back to, man, was my childhood, because these were my brothers and sisters growing up, these people that were hopeless. And let's make no mistake about it, my friend, this generation is maybe amongst the most hopeless that planet Earth has ever known. I like to say to parents all the time that behavior is a form of communication, right? And this generation is communicating with us with their own hands. Mm-hmm. And things like suicides in 10 to 14-year-olds since 2007 have tripled. And that may be the worst of the destructive decisions, but all of them are grossly on the rise. And that is an enormous conversation. It's an enormous challenge. It might be the greatest moral puzzle that we've ever faced in human history, mm-hmm. that our young people are leaving this world at a rate that maybe our veterans are. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you look at these destructive decisions, the parallel is scary. What's happening with our kids right under our noses, and we're not even really having the conversation in the general public. So that's the really quick Reader's Digest version. I talk to parents every day of the week, usually, teachers, students. So there's a lot of things to talk about. But if there's something you want to jump onto, love to go in that direction.
I do. There's a few things I want to unpack there, because you talked a lot about your childhood and your relationship with your parents and stuff, and how you guys were basically helping other people, bringing them essentially off the street and giving them a place to live. With your dynamic with your own parents, you being in the house and then having to, like you said, sleep in a bathtub. I mean, what kind of relationship did you have with your parents that maybe translated into you being a dad?
Well, my relationship with my father, my dad's a tricky character. I mean, I've never met, and everybody probably says this, but, my dad, I remember my grandmother, his mother, telling me that he's been like this since he was in high school. They stripped him of his, he graduated with 1,000 students in Philadelphia. And, he was always like this, in opposition to people. And my dad, oh man, I just don't want to jump down too many rabbit holes, but, my dad's the kind of guy that when the Jehovah's Witnesses show up, he's like, "Oh, come on in, come on in." And after hours and books and all kinds of stuff everywhere, all over the table. And I can remember as a kid, us sitting up at the top of the stairs watching my dad. Um, they would always leave first, and he'd invite them back, and they would never come back because. But it's really hard to describe him. I mean, he walked away from. Almost was finished with his PhD, just had to finish his dissertation, and had a disagreement with the sponsor of his dissertation, and he left Ohio State and never finished his PhD. And he's just, I've never seen my dad keep a job. He's always been in education. And after 3 or 4 years, he's going to tell you what's wrong, but it's always been in defense of the people that are hopeless, struggling kids, and him saying, no, the way you're trying to train and teach and grow these young minds, you're wrong. They're not, you can't put a label on them. It's funny, it's just coming together for me right now. You know, my dad would say something like, labels are for jelly jars. They're not for kids. And every kid is an individual. And, you know, that started with him opening up our home and bringing people in. But it translated into the rest of his life, which, you know, really, I mean, I think my dad's story is a bit of a tragedy. And if he were on here right now, he would convince me how wrong I am. Like if he was on here with us right now. So, yeah, like that's my dad. And, you know, but there's parts of his, oh man, I wasn't planning on thinking about this. I thought we were going to talk about like, you know, advice for parents, but I've learned a lot from my father, and he's probably one of the greatest influences in my life. But at the same time, I did make a couple years ago the decision not to go down the road to ostracize people because of a belief system, and not listening to someone else's perspective. My dad's opinion is very strong, but it always is in defense of people that can't defend themselves. And I think that's the beauty of who he is. Mm-hmm. And my mom is just a super hard worker. She's not I say she's not a cookie mom. She's a sheetrock mom. As a kid, I would come home from school and she'd have a bandana over her mouth, and she'd be up, you know, doing some sheetrock covered in dust. And I really think I get my hard work from my mom. Like I don't have an off switch. I'm on every day, 365 days a year. I'm doing something to especially build the organization. So I don't think I really answered your question.
Well, it's okay, because I think what's interesting, you talk about your dad and the way that he was, he's very opinionated, and it would essentially, for lack of better words, would essentially preach to these young people that would come into the home to help them, right? Because you said that they felt lost, they felt helpless, and he wanted to help them and essentially preach to them to help them, I guess, to help them learn and be better. But isn't it funny that, you know, he was that way, and here you are talking all over the country to young people in a different context, you know, and speaking about something maybe different, but you're essentially helping them. You're essentially helping them because you're helping them be better human beings. And so you almost followed the same line as your dad, just kind of listening to your story.
My dad couldn't make it in the public school system, though. And I've been in the public school system for about the last 12 or 13 years. And I have a real opinion about public education. I'm a product of public education, but my dad makes it about a year in a public school before they throw him out because he just won't back down. And I've learned to temper that. I think there's this like really neat, like form of like, not form, but version of Socrates. You know, my dad's version of Socrates is like those who are the hardest to love are the ones that need it the most, I believe Socrates that said, and get out of his way. He's going to be there to defend those people. Me, you know, like Socrates, they made him drink eucalyptus because, you know, they said he was corrupting the minds of the youth. Where I have taken a more strategic or tactical position, and it's allowed me to not sacrifice some of my own beliefs, but it's allowed me to do it in more of a head fake kind of way. You know, like when you teach someone something, if you head fake them, you're like playing a game with them, but you're actually teaching them a lesson. And for me, my motivation is not to butt heads with administration or parents. Mm-hmm. It's to grow with them. Mm-hmm. And I was, you know, I've been reading Robert Greene's book, the laws of human nature. And he talks about the fact that there's at any given time, there's like 4 generations alive. If you haven't read this book, man, it's just powerful. The laws of human nature. But you have these 4 generations alive at any given time, right? You got like the baby boomers, the Xers, the millennials, and the Zs, right? And 2 generations are always in opposition to the others. And he has this wonderful quote that says something about like today's youth are godless and they'll never be able to preserve our culture. And it's from 1000 BCE on a piece of Sanskrit. Like nothing has changed.
Right.
But where my dad would be part of one of these generations that would say, you know, you've got it messed up. I'm going to say, how do we bridge the gap between the generations? And I think, you know, I don't know if I got that from my mom tolerating my father for so many years. But something got me to say, you know what? I'm not going to be this argumentative, draw a line in the sand. I quit if you don't listen to me. And I think it's because I've spent more time. I think it was G.K. Chesterton that said, I've spent more. He said, I in all my years of, I've learned more in the nursery than all my years of philosophy combined. And I think I've spent more time listening to young people and not just forming an opinion based on a belief system. And I think it's just helped me be able to bridge the gap very nicely with a whole bunch of different entities. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, you're good. That's interesting. I want to shift gears a bit and talk about your influence on young men and women, teenagers. I have kind of well, I don't want to say similar because it's really not, but I have done the same type of work in the way that I've taught young men and women as far as, their teenage years, as far as athletics goes, because I've been a coach, basketball coach, sports coach for over 20 years. And one of the things that I really loved about coaching, obviously I'm a competitive guy. I want to win the games, that kind of stuff. And I want my players to learn the fundamentals and learn the plays and all those things. Right. But one of the things that I loved about coaching was pouring into these young men and that maybe grew up in a home life that was hard. Maybe they didn't have a dad. I can tell you, I can tell you there's so many players that I've coached who had parents that I've never met because they just never showed up for anything for their child. And to listen to these young men talk to me and be able to pour into them, I just loved it. I just loved every minute of it. And so much so that even after I had a player in high school that had graduated and he was kind of lost and didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. And he reached out to me and he said, Coach, can we just sit down? I want to talk to you and see if maybe you can give me some direction. Because he didn't have a dad in his life and his mom worked 2 jobs. She was never around. And so I said, yes, but here's the rules. I want you to have some goals written down that you want to do. And I want you to be prepared for the work that I'm going to give you to help you. And if you can do those 2 things, I'll sit down with you. And he said, yes, I'll do that. So we sat down for lunch and we chatted for a good 2 hours. Went over his goals, went over the things that he wanted to do. He really wanted to play college football. And he wasn't in school and he wanted to play college football. And we sat down, we wrote out a game plan. I gave him some books to read. I told him, these are the things I'm going to do for you. These are what you're going to do for me. I'm going to check in with you. I'm going to make sure you're staying on track. All that stuff happened. Make a long story short, the kid ultimately ended up playing college football. And I don't take the credit for that, but I take, some of the guidance that he needed and what I poured into him to help him along the way. He ultimately made the decisions and took the right steps to get into school and to start playing ball. But he took the time to sit down with me and I gave him the steps on what he needed to do to get there. And I think that's so cool that you're helping these young people in a world that's tough, in a world that's hard. When it comes to bullying, though, I think that's really a hot topic, especially over the last couple of years. a hot topic, and you talk about bullying and then suicide. I mean, all that stuff's just so prevalent right now with what's going on in the world. How does that impact you and your relationship with your kids? I mean, have you had those same kind of conversations with your own children? And I'm going to further that by saying, if there are parents out there that are struggling with their child being bullied and not sure how to get around it or how to fix it, what kind of advice could you give to them?
Oh man, you said a lot there. My brain was going in about 10 different directions as you were unfolding a lot of that. Oh man, well, I'll kind of end on bullying. It's something that we talk about. I would tell you that, I used to use the word bullying all the time. We're the bully guys, the stop, drop, and roll of bullying. We do K-12 messages. And our message really has centered on empowering students. And a lot of people think, oh, you're empowering students that are marginalized, students that are bullied. And I say, no, not really. That was never the intent of our message. Our message started out with this word, sweethearts. And people say, well, sweethearts, what does that mean? Well, the word bully in the 16th century meant sweetheart. You always pause there because someone's going to say, and they're going to smile. It was a very endearing term. It was someone that came into your life and they said, hey, man, get your crap and get in the car. You picked this sport. You're not quitting. You're going to finish the season. You brought that instrument home and it was really hard. You thought you were going to be a rock and roll star, but you realized how hard it was. And they're like, hey, young man, I bought that instrument for you. Let's go get it out of its case and start practicing. Or maybe when you were in college one day and life was tough, and you didn't feel like getting out of bed, he or she called you up and said, get your stuff on, I'm coming over, we're going out. Those are your 16th century bullies, the people in your life. And what they really gave you was hope. And that's really my speaking partner, Rick. 70% of his body was instantly burned away in Iraq. And he hit an IED in a Bradley September 1st, 2006. If he were on here, he would tell you it's the best thing that ever happened to him. And it's really because of all the hope he's been able to give young people over the years. But what he was given that brought him through those challenges over a decade was hope. And that was the inception of our message, was really about empowering other young people that are in those environments. Because really, I mean, the environment just dictates everything. I mean, most parents think that they have an influence on their kid. And I think it's, what's his name, Russell Barkley from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, did a ton of stuff on this with ADHD kids and found that maybe you have an influence on your kid between 0 and 7. But once a kid gets to, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, your influence on them drops dramatically. And you know this, right? Your kids came home and they learned something from another man, one of your friends, maybe a teacher. And you're like, dude, I've been telling you that for years.
Right.
And they just don't listen to you, right? And they do listen to you. And it's pretty cool once they get older, they come back to you and you're like, oh, they did get it. But growing up, I think Harvard did a great study and said the number one contributing factor for a young man's success is having a positive male role model. That's it. Doesn't always have to be a dad, but it's got to be that model. And young women I want to say it's a completely different discussion. I love talking about young women. I own 3 of them, or used to. But I'm going to stay in this vein of young men for a second because I've got a tremendous connection with young men. When you play, a minute or two of you locked into a cage and blood and fists, and you run out on stage and the first thing you say is, who knows what the name of that sport is? And then finally, when you land on the word mixed martial arts, you say, I'm going to tell you one thing about mixed martial arts, and I'm not going to mention it for the rest of the time that we're together. You ready for this? I hate fighting. And all those young men are like, what the? Right. I'm here to talk about bullying. You hate fighting. That's not what I saw on the screen. And I take just a minute or two in a 90-minute assembly to educate young people about the sport of mixed martial arts. It's a competition like any other competition. I see 0 violence in mixed martial arts. I see a ton of aggression, but violence is perpetrated on people outside of their will. And so I just can hook young men, and then I have the opportunity to give them these great lessons. And really, a lot of the lessons that we give, it's about, vulnerability. If I were to say to you, making yourself vulnerable, it makes you feel what?
Weak.
Right. It's the first thing people say. And I say, okay, imagine when your son was 7 or 8, or you had a little daughter that's 7 or 8, and she comes home and says, Daddy, I want to do the talent show. And she picks out a song. The night of the talent show comes, the auditorium's packed with people. She runs up on that stage. We'd all say she's making herself vulnerable. By definition, it means opening up yourself to attack. Most people don't realize that's why Superman ripped that shirt open, because people were going to judge him for what he believes, for the people he helps. That little girl gets up there on that stage. She might forget her lines. People might laugh at her. But are you telling me that she's weak? It's a question. Are you telling me that she's weak?
Yes.
Like getting up there on the stage?
No.
You'd say
no.
Superheroes live in the world of vulnerability, and vulnerability equals strength. And so our message, especially, I don't want to say especially for young men, but for students, it's really been about empowering those young people that already have superpowers, that probably have picked them up from the other great influencers in their lives, getting them to understand that you may look silly and ridiculous helping someone that can't help themselves, but the world doesn't change unless you do it. I mean, it was Solzhenitsyn that said that the universe has as many centers as there are human beings. So if you can get one kid to help one other kid, you've changed the world, because you've changed that kid's world. And a lot of the time, it's just about, that ignition and getting kids to understand that they're the ones that need to change the world, not you and I, but them. And a lot of what we do is getting young people to, we would say, jump into action and help young people that are struggling in those environments. Because honestly, man, I can go talk to a kid once or twice, but I'm really not going to change that kid's state, right? I'm not going to change his or her state. But the other kids in that environment, in that schools, are the ones that have the ability to take the lessons that they've gotten from all their influencers, once they understand and practice jumping into action, using some of these great skills that they picked up from different influencers in their lives to help the people around them. So I'm kind of a little bit off track, because I got about 10 different directions that you when you were talking about, young people, and but
how has that impacted you, as far as how have you kind of taught your own kids those kinds of lessons that you're trying to teach all these other kids?
Oh man,
what kind of conversations has gone on with you trying to be not only the dad, but also, essentially the educator?
Yeah, man, that's a tough one for me. It's something I don't know if I've fully unpacked yet in my own life. I have this existential guilt. I'm not sure if that's quite the right way to frame it, but I wrestled with this one for a long time. I don't talk much about this, and I probably should, but I hope I was a good dad. I really do. I got a daughter that's 25 who is a general manager for a restaurant of 70 employees. I got one that's in the Air Force, and she's a crew chief, and she changes engines on F-35s. I've got Claudia, who's the Marine. And then I got Thomas, who's 19. And I worry that I was spending more time. I mean, I'm on the road 200 days a year, man, since 2014. And, I worry that, I don't know, I hope I didn't abandon my own kids for other kids. And, I was like, I don't know, man, it's a tough one. I wasn't thinking about even talking about this today. I think that as I look at my kids today, though, I think that the model that I displayed for them, even though I was absent a lot, talking to other kids, I don't know. I don't know if it's about taking your kids to Disney World. I don't know if it's about spending all that time camping and hunting and fishing with them. I don't know. You got me kind of stumped here, man, because I think a lot about this one, and I don't know how to unpack it, because the story hasn't been finished yet. And I guess I got to see where my kids land. I think they're pretty well adjusted. But we'll see. Time will tell. I don't know. You got me a little stumped on this one.
It sounds like they're pretty well adjusted. I mean, you got two that are essentially in the military. One that's a manager. What's your son doing? Is he going to college or?
I told all my kids not to go to college. I said, don't waste your time on college. That's a fun conversation too. Well, come on, man. When you look at what are the two things that human beings need outside of food, shelter, and water, right? We all need two things. They're these common threads that weave between all of us. Number one is some kind of meaning or purpose, some kind of significance, right? That's what one of the things that leads someone to feeling hopeless on the inside is they really struggle with meaning or purpose. I mean, when Rick came back and he got 70% of his body was taken from him, he was a leader of men. He was a football player, wrestler, and in the blink of an eye, it was taken from him. And he lost that meaning. And our children today, it may be in the most advanced technological civilization Earth has ever known, struggle with meaning. And, it was, who was it? Was it Chesterton also? I don't think it was Chesterton, but he said, meaninglessness does not come from the exhaustion of pain. Meaninglessness comes from the exhaustion of pleasure. We have accentuated our kids today, everything they have, but this lack of meaning that they search for, that every human searches for, they struggle with it. And so, when I talk about college, a lot of the times it's like youth sports, right? Youth sports can be a disaster because it's more about dad's significance than it is about the kids. Dad still wants to be out there on the field.
Right.
So when I talk about college, a lot of times there was a time, when I was younger, I'm a Generation Xer, and you kind of had to go to college, but I don't know if you have to today. And, just like youth sports can be about dad's significance, I think college a lot of times can be about mom's significance. Mom likes to tell her friends that, Jenny's going here, Billy's going there. I don't know if we need college anymore these days. And I don't want to open up a can of worms and debate that. But, I think a kid should go to college when they're ready to go to college, not when we tell them they should go to college. And I talk to tens of thousands of students a year, and every one of them, if you ask them why they're going to college and you really dig into it, it's because their parents want them to.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Go ahead.
So I was just off on a little tangent there, like I told you I would. But so you asked about my son, Thomas. My son, Thomas, is really into weightlifting, strongman stuff. And, and so he's working in the direction of personal training. And just, I just believe you should always let a child, your job as a parent is two things. Because I said there's these two common threads that we all share. One of them is this need for significance or purpose or meaning. Your job as a parent is to grow that significance, that meaning, that purpose. Put them in environments that are rich in cultivating what they want to do. I had this dad one time, I was standing there talking to him, and I was just talking to his daughter, and I was like, what do you want to do as you get older? And she goes, well, I want to cut hair. And the dad turns to her and says, oh, you can do more than that, sweetie. And I turned and looked at the guy and I said, I got a friend of mine that makes millions of dollars cutting hair. I said, she's too good for that. He's like, oh, no, that's not what I meant. I said, well, she's got to start with a chair.
Right.
Maybe then she'll own the salon someday. But it's really about her significance, not yours, Dad.
Right.
And so for me, my job as a parent is to grow the significance of my child. My daughter Isabel could fly a plane before she could really even drive a car. She took some $50 an hour flying lessons and got her junior pilot's license before she could even drive a car. And today she's changing engines on F-35s. Just because I recognized one of her, that we built around her what she wanted her significance to be. And so that's just one of the great jobs of parenting, is just identifying what their significance is, not yours, and growing it. And that's really hard for a parent because you got to shelf what you want for your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And every parent knows what they want for their kid, but they're not you. And that guy from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, talks about this too, that you're this beautiful mosaic of your extended family, not of you,
right,
dad or mom.
Right.
And so you got to let them develop, man.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think that we have to, as parents, we have to stop hoping that our kids are going to grow up like us because we're two separate people. Even though they're part of us, we're two separate people. You want your children to be better than you. You want your children to, I love it that you said what you said about significance, having significance or purpose. It's funny that you bring that we talk about college, because a lot of times kids go to college and they don't know why they're going, and they don't know what they want to do even after they graduate college. That happens a lot. And so it's determining. I remember when I was a child, I wanted to be a cartoonist. And then I started going to community college when I got out of high school, and I had an a drawing class that I was part of, and I drew this picture and the professor ripped on it. And I thought it was great. I thought it was brilliant. She said, draw a picture of something that draws itself. And so I drew a cartoon character. It was a fox. I drew a fox on this big poster board, colored it, did the whole 9 yards. And I had him holding a pencil and drawing his own body. And I thought it was brilliant. But my teacher said, you completely missed the point. And ever since that day, I wanted out of school. I wanted nothing to do with school. And it shot that dream down that I had, that professor. And I came home and I told my dad, I'm going to take a break from college because I would just want to work and relax. And he said, okay. He goes, I said, I'll go back after I take, maybe a semester off. He said, I'm going to tell you something. You'll never go back. If you quit now, you'll never go back. And I said, well, I will. And he said, okay, well, if you're going to quit college that we're paying for, then you're going to start paying rent, because you're not doing anything else. You're going to start paying rent. And so that's how the job of the military came up. I started talking to my manager at the store that I worked, and he said, you need to go in the Marines if you want to go in the military. And that's how that started. I went home, told my parents, I'm going in the Marine Corps. And my dad said, good for you. My mom said, no. So that's how my story of the Marines got started. I just said, I'm going in the Marines. But I run all over. I get off on tangents as well. But my point is that yes, kids need to find that purpose. And a lot of times that purpose changes throughout their life. When they're younger, they want to be a veterinarian, they want to be a firefighter or something like that. And then as they get older, that may change. But parents is really honing in on their significance and helping them, maybe it is college, maybe they do want to go to college. My son wanted to play college basketball. That's what he wanted to do. And he ended up playing college basketball. My other son went to college because he wanted to own a business. He wanted to learn about business. So he thought going to college was the right thing for him. Yes, you need to find your kids' significance and hone in on it and help them develop it and make it stronger. I think that's great.
Here's the greatest gift that you can give a kid. So one of my favorite authors is a guy named Stuart Brown. He wrote a great book called Play, Play. And he makes a very bold claim. He's one of the great play scientists of our time. Between him and Peter Gray, and any parent listening should go to Psychology Today and look up Peter Gray's work. He's one of the greatest. He wrote a great book called Free to Learn, top 5, one of my favorite books. But this book by Stuart Brown is called Play. And here's the claim that he makes. He says, everything a child learns to transition Everything a mammal learns to transition successfully from childhood into adulthood, they learn in one place and one place only, in self-directed, self-controlled play. Everything. It did not come from you, mom or dad. It did not come from a classroom. It came from self-directed, self-controlled play. That's where you get socialized. You must get socialized by the age of 4 or 5, or you have some real challenges as you get older and as you continue to mature, if you're not socialized properly. But all of your negotiation, your cooperation, your teamwork, everything is derived from the thousands of repetitions that you put in when you're playing with other mammals, usually a year or two older than yourself, because you're trying to replicate their behavior. Now, when you talk about play, though, Stuart Brown talks about the 12 great play personalities. My daughter, Abigail, if my wife were sitting right next to me right now, she'd be like, oh my gosh, you could hear her growing up. She was the oldest. in the other room with her sister, the one that's in the Air Force. Isabel, say this. Isabel, do this. Isabel, say this. Abby is a director. That's one of the great 12 play personalities. She's just a director. She manages 70 employees, and she's been doing it since she's been 20 years old. And most of them are old enough to be her mother or her father at a restaurant. 70 employees. But she's been a director her whole life. There are explorers. There are collectors. There are kinesthets. I mean, there's certainly not just these 12 play personalities, but these are like the big groups of play, the personalities that people have that will guide their play. So when I work with a lot of parents and students, I say, what's your play personality? Most people have no idea.
Right.
But Stuart Brown says, if you can tie your play personality to your adult life, you will always find joy. If I go into a room and I have 100 educators and I say, who played teacher growing up? About 75% of them will put their hands up in the air. And they are not the ones ever that are like I meet a lot of teachers and you're like, hey man, how many years you got left? Well, I got 7 years, 12 days, 3 hours, and 6 seconds left. And you know what I always say to them? Oh, you never played teacher growing up, did you? When you tie that, so when you look at significance and purpose, I always tell parents, start there. What's your kids' play history? What's their play personality? And now your job is to put them in those environments to grow that, because you can't ever change it. Mm-hmm. If you start to analyze your own play history, your own play personality, it's impossible to change it. That's the way that you were wired. And most people say, I can't do that when I get older. Well, why not? Why can't you do a derivative of that? Whatever that thing is that you love doing, instead of settling for what your parents want you to do, which kind of screws you up for the rest of your life.
Right. No, it's funny when you're talking about that, I'm thinking about my own life and just the fact that I wanted to be a cartoonist and get into that kind of line of work because I love to draw. I love to do those kinds of things. And I didn't follow that path, yet I still have found myself, even into my adult life, drawing in some way. And it's still, that passion or that love is still there. I mean, I did Christmas caricatures out on our front yard. I made out of wood that I painted, and like all the different characters for Christmas, Santa and all his sleigh and Rudolph. And I did all that stuff and had these art displays in my front yard for Christmas. So I still have that passion to do it. But
imagine if your parents wrapped you in all of that growing up and they're like, whoa, buddy. And imagine where you'd be today. I mean, I'm glad that your parents screwed you up the way you did, because then we wouldn't have got a chance to meet, right? I'm being funny. But just imagine that, if our parents wrapped us in those things that we found joy in.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, man. That's so good. That's so good, man. Gosh, I feel like, Tom, we could probably talk for a couple more hours. Really could, because there's so many different things that we could talk about that we have just literally ran out of time for. So I might have to have you back on, just because the conversation has been so raw, so genuine, and just been really great. For my listeners, want to look you up.
I mentioned two things, and somebody's going to listen and say, well, you said two things. We all need two things. So just give me just a couple minutes, because this is very, very important, especially to the work that we do. I'm not sure if there's any, so the second thing that we all need, that even service members struggle with, it's why 22 a day take their own lives. Mm-hmm. They have this struggle with meaning or purpose. But the other thing that really leads someone to a feeling of hopelessness, and I learned this from my childhood, but now as I've studied it, it's human acceptance. And, we're just a bunch of pack animals. And if you understand that as an educator, it makes kids real easy to teach. I just watched a teacher yesterday move a kid in an auditorium and separated him from his pack. And the second she did that, he's like, not because he was in trouble, just because he couldn't be with his pack. And once a kid hits those formative years, a lot of times their friends become more important than their own families. And it's okay. It's supposed to be that way. In Attack of the Teenage Brain, um, he talks about this as well. He talks about this program that runs in a teenage brain. You cannot stop it. It's been running for hundreds of thousands of years. They've become very disagreeable, very prickly. They seek novel sensations. They do really stupid things. Mom would keep that kid till he's 30 in the teepee, but at 12 or 13, he's got to wander out into the wilderness where he could get eaten by lions and shot by arrows. But it's just a biological program that runs because you're not supposed to mate with your own pack. So you got to go out and find a new pack, and you can't stop it. And a lot of parents try and stop it. You can't. It's impossible. But that deep need for acceptance, parents say to me all the time, they say, well, okay, I can help build my kids' significance by paying attention, tying it to their play personality, tying it to their play history, wrapping them in environments that are rich, like Miracle Grow, to grow that significance. But how am I going to make them accept other people? And I say, well, I don't know if we can, but what we can do, and I like to do this in groups of people. I don't know if you've ever seen anyone do this, but Simon says, make a circle. You ever seen this? Now hold that circle up. I got to see it. Simon says, take that circle. Now watch me and put it on your chin. Now, do you have a hard time hearing, young man?
No.
Are you trying to piss me off?
No.
What did I say, young man? Put it where?
Oh.
No, I said, put it where? You weren't listening. Now, if you go back and listen to the tape, I said, put it on your chin.
You did?
And why did you do this?
Because you did it.
Now, about 20% of the neurons in your motor cortex are made up of these really funny neurons called mirror neurons. And if I had to give a parent one lesson, and I just did this, you just did this because that's what I did. I just tickled those mirror neurons. They were designed to just follow motion. That's all they're designed to do.
Right.
Now, when I talk to parents, the number one parenting lesson, parenting is never about what we
say.
It's about what we
see,
what we do, what we see.
Right.
When we fire those mirror neurons, largely. And that's a very, very big responsibility for a parent, because most of the time the subconscious will, says that they say the subconscious mind makes 96 to 97% of your conscious decisions every day. That's some scary stuff when you really analyze what you're doing as a parent. So when I talk about human acceptance, you can't make kids accept other kids, but what you can do, mom and dad, is you can model that acceptance, especially of those people that are the most challenging. And when your neighbor is on your lawn by like a half an inch with his lawnmower and you're scrubbing the dishes, looking out the window like, that guy's always on our lawn. And your daughter goes to school and someone puts a piece of tape and it's like touching her locker by a little bit. You know what she's going to do? She always puts it on my locker. She's just going to do exactly what you're doing. And it doesn't matter what you tell them with young people. And I have this debate, this conversation, not really a debate, but this conversations with parents all the time. I told my daughter, what is she seeing?
Right.
Does she see when you're walking with her as a little girl down the street and here's this homeless guy coming down the street and you're like, oh, sweetie, let's go to that side of the road. Right. Or when you're coming out of the grocery store and you're like, let's let him go by first, sweetie. Right? What are you showing her? Because it doesn't really matter what you tell her, because when she gets to be in, 4th grade, 5th grade, you're going to push her out the door and say, hey, make sure you stick up for those kids that are different, sweetie. But that doesn't matter. And so when we talk about the other great thing that we all share, that we all need, it's to be accepted. And the only way we change this world today is by showing our kids how we can bend the knee, can make ourselves vulnerable, which makes us feel really super weak. And we can go out of our way to help those people, especially that are hopeless, because our kids will never be able to do those skills, no matter what their significance is, no matter what their meaning ends up being. It all comes down to one thing: the relationship that we have with other people on this earth. I think it was Tolstoy that said, everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change themselves. And just like Mother Teresa said, you can change the world by starting with the person right next to you. And that's what we need to model to our children if we're going to fix this mess that's going on in the world today.
Oh, so good, man. So good. I love it. I love it. That's why I got to have you back on, because there's so much more we can talk about. But yeah, it's so true. I see the parents that struggle with that every single day. Even the dads that I coach, I see them struggle with that. You're absolutely right. Gosh, really good, Tom. Really good, man. Yeah, if my listeners want to look you up, learn a little bit more about you, best places for them to do that.
Yeah, just sweetheartsandheroes.com. They can find some stuff, but I try and have 100% response rate on emails. So it's hard. I travel 230 days a year sometimes. But I try and get back to everybody. And I think this is what I'll do for the rest of my life, man, is make a difference in people's lives.
Well, you are, and I know you will. Thank you again, brother, for being on.
We didn't even get to talk about girl power yet.
Right. We'll save it for the next one.
Or being a husband, which is probably more important than being a father.
Being a husband, I always talk about it, that the foundation of our family is the husband and wife.
Amen.
And how they treat each other and how they respond and act with each other. That is the foundation of your family right there. I talk about it all the time. So
I'll leave you with a cliffhanger. I said this once in front of 500 women. I said, if I have my kids, all 4 of them in my hand, and my wife, and they were both hanging over a cliff, and I had to let one go, my kids or my wife, I wouldn't hesitate. I'd let all 4 of my kids go. I wouldn't even think twice. I think that your spouse has to become the most important person in your life before your children. And I think that's where a lot of men make sense.
What do you think where do you think your wife would say?
You'd have to ask her, but it's an interesting thing, man, because, your dad can be in prison and, a kid will be like, oh, my dad, he's a great dad. He just made some mistakes. You'll always have a relationship with your parent. But a lot of people, they have a child and they start putting the child before their spouse, which in my opinion is a huge mistake.
Yep.
You'll always have a good relationship with your kids if you have a good relationship and your spouse comes first.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's another discussion.
Yep. I'm completely on board with you. I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's something that my wife and I strive to do every day, especially when my kids were growing up, is just model who we are as a couple, because we believed that that's where our kids' foundation really starts, and how they see and the way they hear us and see us interact with each other. And my wife and I, my boys are grown. They're grown men. But my wife and I still make our marriage a priority, whether we read every night. We have a marriage book that we read out of every night together. We spend a half an hour reading the chapter, and then we sit and talk about it. It allows us to bond and connect. We either do that, or we have a marriage game that we play. We mix it up between the two, between those two. We have a marriage coach that we go see every other month. Those kinds of things are important, and we believe they're important. Even though our kids are adults now, they know the kind of parents we are, they know the kind of couple we are, but we still want to maintain that relationship. And that's why we do that stuff. So, so good, man. I'm excited already to have you back on. I'm looking forward to it. All right. Well, cool. Thank you very much, Tom, for being on. I'm sorry we went long, but it's all good.
If you need anything, please, 24/7, 365, get a hold of me. If someone is in need, that's struggling with something, I've just given my life to this. If I can help in any way, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again for being on. Listen, everybody, if you're not checking out Sweethearts and Heroes, please do that. I'll put the links in the show notes, but I just want to thank my good friend Tom for being on the show again. He's a wealth of knowledge and really is making a change in the world when it comes to our young children, our young teenagers, He's doing what he can out there to help not only them, but you as parents. So make sure you're checking out what he's doing. And if you haven't subscribed yet to my show, please make sure you're doing that so you don't miss any of the awesome guests that I have on each and every week. And as always, I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of Dad Up. Wow, another amazing episode in the books. So much was shared, and I'm truly grateful my guest was able to pour into you to help you elevate your dad game and really dad up. Make sure you bang that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And while you're here, please don't forget to leave me a rating and a review. I always appreciate the feedback. And one last thing, don't forget, your role as a dad is one of the most important roles you have. So if you need a little help or have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website at daduptribe.com or at my Instagram page at Dad Up Podcast. Until next time, everyone, Dad Up.